Welcome back and thank you for staying with us. The hashtag on X is Daybreak. The SMS code is 22422 at Citizen TV Kenya and at Ayub Abdikadir. Sure, I will sample a feedback in the course of this broadcast. Coming to you, Wakili Eric Deuri, and on Friday you staged a protest which you dubbed as defending the rule of law. The same day, Martha Koome, the Chief Justice and the President of the Supreme Court, also invited any person or entity who has grievances against any official of the judiciary to come before the JSC. And the Deputy President yesterday said he will be in person there on Thursday. I mean, in your view, what's the state of our democracy and our credentials healthy, given what has been happening since the new year and by extension the past more than 13 years since we promulgated Katiba?
Ayub, would want to say that we are in a state of where we make several steps forward and then several steps backwards.
So it's zero-sum rate.
We are trying to find our level because in this dispensation, you still have challenges with dealing with the old culture of impunity. You remember when the president came in, one of the things which he said is that he will have a largely independent police unit, that the police would not be used to settle political scores and other institutions of government. But we have gone back there. If you remember how the Mandamanos were handled, you see an attempt to encroach, seriously encroach into the independence of the judiciary. I've heard the sentiments that were made by the Deputy President, and I thought to myself, I mean, if you have evidence of corruption against a particular judge, no, you just present it to the Judicial Service Commission. You do not need to, go and make public pronouncements. But let us wait for that and see what happens and the substance of those allegations. You look at Parliament, you want to question yourself. Yes, I can understand that Parliament would be feeling that any court order that stops it from exercising its constitutional functions is something that would largely and extremely aggrieve Parliament. That I can understand. But in the context of a constitutional democracy, even if that order ought not to have been made in the first place, the fact that it exists, you cannot ignore it. Because there is no organ, so to speak, that then is supreme over the other. And that the right thing then to do is to seek for the setting aside of that order before then you can proceed. But if Parliament were to proceed in contempt of that order, then they create a destabilization on the concept of separation of powers and the respect of institutions. And what that tells us, if you look at the independent institutions, IPOA, it's down on its knees. It doesn't have money. It's not able to discharge its functions. The other constitutional commissions, none of them, are acting in a manner to show us that they are actually discharging their mandate. And so I think at this particular point, we are looking at a situation where you have an extremely aggressive and assertive executive, a bit of a lame Parliament, and an institution of the judiciary that is trying to find its feet to assert its authority in extremely difficult circumstances. And so our democracy at this point is one that is under test in terms of whether the institutions that we have in the Constitution can hold forth. And I think it is our collective responsibility to say that the state of affairs may be one that is extremely wanting but we need to improve on that. But finally, let me just say something, because it is important in terms of what we were talking about, is the place of government in creating a statehood and the place of government in creating conditions that nurture the growth of democracy. One of those is the question of our, Article 10, transparency, accountability. And I think we have a problem when it comes to transparency and accountability, especially in the use of the taxes that we are paying and that are being collected by the government. If you look at the provision of services, education, health, roads, water, there is an extremely huge imbalance. And you find that most of those services, even garbage collection, that the citizens have to supplement that with private entities. Government institutions that are supposed to provide those critical services are failing to deliver, and we will not grow as a democracy if even the government in itself is failing in discharging its obligations in those, because what then happens is that the center becomes weak, it cannot hold, and every other would fall.
Honorable Yusuf, the point of independence is stressed on, and it's very important that we highlight on that. But interdependence is as well key, because the house where you sit in is an arm of government that exercises some powers to an extent, even the Kenyan people granting you, members of parliament, the National Assembly, the powers to even impeach a sitting president. Talk to us then about how the sort of the debate we are having at the moment is likely going to test and strain our democracy. And is it healthy from where you sit?
Well, I would like to have a different take on that. I think it was President Nyerere who said that democracy is not a bottle or a can of Coca-Cola that one can give you that has got all the ingredients, and by drinking it you become a democrat. Democracy is not a one-day event. Democracy is a process. And I think underpinning our democracy is our constitution. We have a fantastic constitution that balances power between the president, the executive, the parliament, the legislature, and the judiciary. And I think one should not be misled by the fact that because there's a debate on issues relating to parliament or to the judiciary, or there's a criticism coming from certain quarters, that in fact our democracy is impaired or endangered in any way. Because after all, our democracy is based on the masses, the people of Kenya. It's the people of Kenya who've elected this particular government and have elected parliament. And they are the custodians of our democracy. It is simply not like the old days, because I have been been a political activist almost my entire life, is that there were times when even opening your mouth would put you into trouble. Either you would go to jail or you may even be harmed physically. So let's put things into perspective. When you talk of the independence of Parliament, and some people say that Parliament has been captured, what are we talking about? After all, Parliament consists of the majority party, which is the ruling party, which has a majority, inbuilt majority. And then there's an element, there's a caucus in that structure as well, that sometimes allies itself with the government and sometimes sits in the middle or sometimes is in opposition. So these are choices made by the elected representative of Kenyans. And to say that, in fact, a president or a particular leader has usurped the powers of parliament is kind of misleading, because it is the same democracy that we seem to be worried about that is playing out in our parliament. Similarly, when you look at the judiciary, it's another body which has complete independence. And one of the testimonies that, in fact, the separation of power is working in our country is that the president himself is crying out in public rallies to criticize the judiciary and to use his executive powers to put pressure on the judiciary. Yet the judiciary is not succumbing to that. The judiciary is standing up. The legal fraternity is standing out. That is a reflection of our democracy, where you don't overlook the fact that, in fact, the president is not having his way. He's been counter-checked by the citizens, by the legal fraternity, and by judiciary. So, in a way, I would say that is a testimony to the efficacy, the operationality, or the practical existence of our democracy based on our constitution. And neither the president, nor the judiciary, nor the opposition, nor parliament can change these things without the process of consultation. That eventually, even when you change our constitution, is going to be done through a referendum, which is by a majority voice of the greater population of our country. So our democracy is going through ups and downs. But it does not mean that, in fact, our democracy is any danger. The teething problem description is there what you give. I'll come to you, Senator. You mentioned Parliament. It's very key that we get back to that point, because I want to seek some clarity and answer to that effect. And when you talked about Parliament and its existence, and you said the people of Kenya are the custodians, because there was a debate and many Kenya Kwanza leaders were asking who is the judiciary answer, who does it answer? I mean, they said we are subjected to universal suffrage every 5 years, we get elected, the executive led by the president, the same. But Parliament is where the problem is, and that's where you sit. Why then would, for example, on an issue like the cost of living, Kenyans seem to be moving away from you parliamentarians to go and petition a court of law on issues like the cost of living? It seems they have no trust in you for you to undertake your responsibility as parliamentarians. You have failed in that, is it? No, we haven't. Because, you know, when you look at the cost of living is not a legislative issue alone. It has a number of multiple factors. What is the underlying economic problems that we have in our country? Are these things that can be regulated by Parliament or through a public pronouncement by the President? No, it isn't. I think we're taking a very simplistic approach to the cost of living, because there are multiple factors. One, it could be some people easily focus on taxation. You know, the taxes were only introduced recently. In terms of macroeconomics of taxation on our economy and on the cost of living, it cannot be determined in this short period that we have. But there are underlying problems, like the fuel prices, the depreciation of our shilling, the general global economic conditions, the government's overspending and deficits. All these things put together are what has created the conditions in which we have, economic conditions in which we have. And these are not conditions that can be legislated or cleared through a roadside declaration by a president. These are serious structural problems, economic structural problems in our country that require a very decisive, focused, and short-term, medium-term, and long-term approaches for us to get out of the economic crisis that we're in. But to think that, in fact, a legislator or even the president himself can just wish away these factors, economic factors, is misguided. We'll talk more about that, because I'll cite the control of budget and where she pinpointed the fault lines are and Parliament's critical role in the budget-making process. Senator, coming to you, I'm sure you have some response to what the honourable member has said here. But given what we are undergoing at the moment, is it transformational to the effect of a long-term democratic gains, or these standoffs that might, in the end up eroding some of the gains that we have made?
Let me reiterate one point here, which is very crucial to all Kenyans, is that we must continue strengthening our judiciary in this country. And this is a process that requires a lot of resources, political and social commitment. Because without a strong judiciary, we give room to corruption, we give room to lack of accountability. And this is why the framers of the Constitution were very clear in setting up a dispute resolution mechanism where you feel aggrieved by the judiciary. You know, in this case, we have the JSA, you know, which I believe is a competent body that can be able to deal with any issues of complaint. I think what the president and his deputy are doing is completely trying to usurp powers from that independence, or taking away the independence of that judiciary.
Can they?
They cannot. They cannot, because we will not allow it as citizens. We will not allow it because we've seen what has happened. You see, there's a question of merit here, or meritocracy. If you look at other developed nations, meritocracy is what thrives. But here, now, when you become a president, or when you become the man with the sword, you now want to wash away meritocracy and put in people who you can be able to manipulate. That's a fact. When you hear sentiments by the deputy president saying that he'll be the first one to go in and complain about a particular judge, you know, he's being so petty and personal, because he cannot say, you know, this person attempted to turn my hard-earned cash, you know, as proceeds of corruption. That's ludicrous. You know, when you have an issue and you have concerns, bring them on the table. But the reason why the framers of the Constitution saw it fit to have separation of powers and give each arm of power its own powers, like the power of mercy given to the judiciary, is so that not one arm of government can take over the other one. What my colleague, the Honorable Yusuf, is saying, I completely disagree. Because theoretically, in a country where everyone is equal, then I think his argument will have some sort of like swimming ability in an ocean. But in this case, there is no inequality. This case is those who have versus those who do not have. You know, when he talks about the majority party forming the government, to be honest with you, it's a misconceived idea, because Parliament is supposed to be there as the legislative arm of government. My colleague talked about Parliament not being able to control the cost of living, and I completely disagree. If Parliament of Kenya, and by Parliament I mean the National Assembly and the Senate, were fully independent, and they were not being controlled by a remote control by the executive, if they were independent, we would be able to control the cost of living in this country. Why? We would be able to limit the level of taxation. Right now, the amount of taxes. In fact, the other day I read in a presser that even now diplomats will now be subjected to taxes. How do you violate the principle of double taxation? How do you violate a system that has been there over time just because you are being controlled by external factors? So really, we have to think of ourselves as looking at a way that we strengthen our institutions, we give them their independence, because a weak institution, particularly the judiciary, will lead to several factors. One, Kenyans, human rights. People will be, their rights will be violated on a daily basis. They will we will not have any way of being accountable to anyone. Because if I have money, I'll say, you know what, I'll just buy the judge. You know, so really, what we should be preaching, and I expect this from the so-called ruling party, for them to be able to continue, you know, preaching what the current occupant of the House in the Hill preached when he took over power. Independence of the judiciary will give them more resources. That is, I think that is the argument that we should have.
Does he then have a point? Okay, to be fair, does he then have a point when the first assignment, when he was sworn in, 13th September 14th, 8 a.m. in the morning, he swore in judges who are rejected by his predecessor, Uhuru Kenyatta. I mean, was he fair in doing that, in keeping up to the word that he said he will do what his predecessor didn't? I
think if you look at what he did then, he will be sending signals that he's going to be a person who will respect the independence of each institution. But the reality is that he does not. The reality is that he wants to be able to choose who listens. He wants to be able to write decisions. He wants to tell people that it is either his way or the highway.
Okay.
You know, so it's not.
Okay, there's a process to pick judges. Senator, we agree on that, and there's also a process to which a magistrate or a judge of the judiciary, be it the High Court, the Court of Appeal, or a justice at the Supreme Court, can come up with a determination to that effect. But coming to you, you made a very critical point of talking about Parliament, and you said that it's captured. I mean, explain to us and to the Kenyan people, you being a parliamentarian, you sit, both Yusuf and you sit in the bicameral parliament, how a Kenyan who is mature, who is above 18, is right thinking, can be captured in the context of playing to the tune of the executive or the government of the day, because that has been the culture. To give you the example of the Senate where you sit during the impeachment of then Deputy Speaker, now Interior CS, Professor Kithure Kindiki, majority of the senators who had ended up voting against him said, look, Mr. Kithure, you are good, but there are some directions and instructions that we have to follow and appease some party who is sitting somewhere. I mean, where does your conscience go once you become a parliamentarian? It's either you are selfish or you are not right thinking for the interest of the public, and that's why this country is sleepwalking into a disaster.
Let me try to contextualize what you've just said there. You have to compare apples to apples. You cannot bring in a matter of loyalty to a political party into an issue of principle. The Honorable Kindiki was disowned by his own political party. My vote would be of zero consequences because his own political party, which elected him to become the deputy speaker, wanted him out. So whether I, Ledamo Lekina, wanted him in, it would be inconsequential. So you cannot compare apples to apples. Now, let's get back into the issue of where you ask, how can an 18-year-old
correct
be manipulated, rightfully thinking? They don't think right. They don't think right. If you read Article 123 of the Kenyan Constitution, in the Senate, we vote by delegations. You require 24 delegations. The first thing that the Speaker, my good friend Kingi, did was to ignore the fact that the political party formed by Pilot, party leader, and former governor of Mandera, what's his name?
Ali Roba.
Ali Roba was part of Azimio. So when you go back to our standing orders, the definition of a political party is either it's a coalition of parties that form 15. When Ali Roba got into power, he was part of Azimio. But then at that particular time, because the speaker was elected by his party, to agree with my colleague to some extent that they call the shots, he decided to overlook that factor that there was a covenant that was signed that required at least a divorce process to be initiated, 90 days, notice to be given for you to be removed out. So it's not an issue of conscience. It is an issue of political superiority. And you know, when you are there, when you are sitting in that seat as a speaker, you have been elected by the majority, and they can remove you at any given time.
But then again,
and I can tell you, it is not an issue of a straight-thinking 18-year-old. You know, it is an issue of inequality. In this country, the problem we have, and this is the big problem we are going to continue having, is that it is not about merit. It is about your tribal mate, your friend. The level of incompetence in this country right now is not because we run short of qualified individuals, but those qualified individuals will never get a fair shot in running any institution because they are not friends of the politicians.
Thank you. And I agreed with you to some extent that Kenya has a pool of professionals who can take this country forward. Wakili, coming to you, Honorable Yusuf, you just hang on for a moment. Given what we have talked about, let's employ this theory here. It's the case of let's not play the ball and play the men. And here we have a president now who has raised allegations of corruption, nothing substantive filed before the JSC. And you had his boss, then former President Uhuru Kenyatta, who said he had reservations about 11 judges who were sworn in by his deputy, the first assignment, because there was apparently intelligence about their integrity. Some, of course, ranked highly across the world, the likes of Professor Joel Ngugi, Harvard, law head whose publishing were globally recognized as one of the best in terms of constitutionalism. I mean, here we have a series of other court orders which were issued actually, but were never implemented, to the extent that Isaac Lenaola, a judge of the Supreme Court, said, look, these are not just mere papers, these are court orders which are binding. It's a culture that we have of not only not the current president, but appears to be also giving us a futuristic view of having political elements who might be irritated by this constitution, might not adhere to its correct dictates and directions.
Yeah, Ayub, that is true. And the one thing that sometimes pleases me about, especially the complaints that the president makes, is that there's something that is restraining him. And that is actually what the constitutional design is. So we look at our history. We know that, previously we've had presidents that have exercised unbridled power and authority. But we have now a president, or we've had presidents before, complaining about that restraint. So to that extent, the constitutional structure appears to be working. What we need to do is to, exercise what we call eternal vigilance, to continue to agitate for these institutions to be stronger, to continue to critique institutions, for example, like Parliament or the executive, when we feel that they are playing at a level below what is expected of them under the Constitution. So it is our civic duty, it is our civic responsibility to ensure that we keep doing that, because it is the only way we can build our institutions. When you look at, for example, the decision in BBI, if you look at the decision that the court gave in the CAS case, and so many other decisions that the courts have given, the critical thing when it comes to interpretation of our Constitution is our history. That is where we start from. And then we ask ourselves, this was our history. Why did we legislate on 1, 2, 3? And when we answer that question, then we now take that and look into the context of the current. And I think that if we can continue with this agitation, if we can, because the fact that like for example, when the deputy president is saying, "I'll present my evidence," that is fine, and it's to be encouraged, because then we can be able to move away from this public lynching and now begin to look at, is there merit in the allegations that the deputy president is raising? Remember, there is a manner in which these cases were handled.
Yeah.
Immediately they came into power. That is extremely problematic. I do know of a case where there's a dispute of ownership of land between the deputy president and another person. And the manner in which state agencies did come in to attempt to charge one person and invalidate using DCI documents that are held by another person to give the deputy president an undue advantage played out. And we had to go to the court to stop that process. So it is extremely beneficial for us as a democracy, for him now to bring that evidence, for anyone else to bring that evidence, so that we can begin to look at it in terms of, does it have merit or not, or is it just a case of sour grapes and looking for easy hits on the judiciary.
Thank you.
But the one thing that I think we need to take home is the fact that we need to be happy as a country that we have the president jumping on public podiums, really complaining about the independence of the judiciary and the fact that they have tried to influence the judiciary to get decisions in a particular way, and that has not worked.
Thank you. Yes, Honorable Yusuf.
Well, I think we may want to look at the reason why we have a constitution. Why do we need a constitution? Why do we need laws? Why do we need rules in our society? Because the simple fact is that human beings behave in a particular way. And you would always want more authority, more power, if you can get away with it. And that's why when we are looking at our political culture is based on these activities outside the presidency, outside the judiciary, and outside parliament. The public rallies, the town hall meetings, the roadside activities. And this is where people articulate their wishes, if they could be allowed. And that's why I think I agree fully with Eric, that in fact what you are seeing here is a cry for more authority, a complaint for more authority, to say, I am the president, I've been elected the president of this country, why can't I do what I want to do? And I can tell you, any president in the world would like to have more powers, would like to have more space to do things the way they want to do it. And that is where our constitution comes in. That's where our laws come in and our rules come in, that there are limitations. And in this particular case, I don't see absolutely any problem in people ventilating their views and their dreams of what they want to do through our well-established political culture, which sometimes can get out of control because it seems to be impinging or trying to roll back our constitution, our laws, and our rules. But I'm confident that that's not likely to happen. I think I'm confident that whatever the president says, whatever the politicians say at the end of the day, we're a country based on a very sound constitution. We're a country that continuously processing to institute laws and regulations to conduct behavior, this civil behavior of the government, of the public, and everybody else. So I want to come back to that issue of saying that just because you're articulating against Parliament, sometimes mistakenly, because you don't understand how Parliament works or how judiciary works, does not mean that our democracy is in any danger. And I think I'm confident that we will continue to preserve and protect and fight for our constitution. And in fact, we enjoy that broad freedom of speech that we have, that we can openly express a lot of things in a public forum, as opposed to any of the countries in our neighborhood and in many, many other countries in the world. And I think we should always have that in mind.
And given the freedom that you have mentioned, let's now boil it down to delivery, because and the language of those who are in positions of leadership, which has been to an extent wanting and condescending. For example, when you have a cabinet minister telling Kenyans to go dig their oil wells, when you have the deputy president who, because I'm sure you understand this very well, over the years since you're also one of the people who have extensively written about the drive to multipartyism. I mean, and the constitution that you have talked about, which is very sound and on a fundamental footing. But it's appalling, is it, when, for example, those in leadership positions tell Kenyans that this is not a republic as established by the constitution, but a shareholding entity, and there are some who have more shares than the other.
Yeah, I think one should not confuse the personal expressions of individuals. However, whatever positions they hold in government. You know, one would expect some state of decorum, some standards, and some discipline in people in leadership. You don't expect to see some of the things that happen out there. But at the end of the day, I think the Kenyan public is very mature, and I observe this in my constituency. There are times when I'm worried about the statements of particular political leaders on our national cohesion and national integrity, because they go down to dangerous levels of incitement. And you would think this is going to be a very dangerous precedent for our country. But when you speak to the person in Shauri Moyo, in Bama Market, for example, or in Kikomba, about the statements of some of our leaders, these statements have become more issues of entertainment, almost like a comedy. The Kenyan public laughs at these things. They don't take them seriously. And I think this is the maturity that I find Kenyans have, that we are no longer going to be driven by the ill-advised, unfortunate statements of public figures. They laugh at them, and we move on as a country. We're not going to be incited anymore by political figures who think they can influence the thinking of the Kenyan people. So I think we are moving forward as a country, as compared to other countries where a public statement can light a fire and an explosion of instability.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Senator?
I totally disagree, respectfully. I think the statement made out, which are made out there by people of power, have a lot of weight in decision-making in this country. There's no institution which is independent. If a person of opposition of a deputy president, like Rigathi Gachagua, makes certain pronouncement that this is a government of shareholders, that trickles down to even to the devolved government structures, where people say, this is our government. You did not participate in forming it, yet you're paying taxes. They're not coming and telling you that now that this is our government, it is only us who are allowed to pay taxes and enjoy the benefits. Number two, there's a serious danger in actually, not taking seriously the consequences of certain utterances. We were among the first people to call out of order our member of parliament from, the one who slapped someone in the...
Peter Salasya.
Peter Salasya. Because that is not the behavior of an elected leader. The problem here is that it is the problem, everybody takes him seriously. Because we have a big gap between the rich and the poor. The poor people, you will attack them, and then later on you come and give them some money, and they will continue supporting you. Because the other person who is so utopian, like my good colleague here, will just come in and preach and say, oh, I can be able to do this thing, this is not right. But what determines is the amount of money that you can put out there to be able to buy those people. You have goons who will be able to carry out and say, wachana naye, hiyo ilikuwa ni vipindi tu. It is very, very serious. We're at a point where the leadership of this country, the person who is leading this country, has got to lead by examples and limit the kind of statement that they make. When you have a president going out there in a public rally and preaching and castigating another arm of government, when he could easily pick up a phone, call the Chief Justice and say, can we have a conversation about some of my concerns? If now there's something in politics and in philosophy which is called the thin line between the master and the slave. And within time, the slaves watch what the master is doing, and soon that slave will do it even better. No one will respect court rules, court orders. No one. It doesn't matter which position you hold in this country. If the president is saying, I will disobey court orders, ordinary Kenyans will say, you know what, you can go to hell. Me, I'll continue with my own business. So really, there's a serious danger. And I think what we ought to be doing is that we should be trying to teach the younger generation, much better. Show them the importance of respecting each institution and not belittling this. I don't take those comments as comedy. I don't. I want every leader, when you go out there, you are able, if you say, I'm going to do this, you actually do it. But if you go there and you make everything drama, it is no longer entertaining, but annoying. So the issue here is that we have to be mature. And I'd like to have...
Are the masses mature? Because you talked about...
We have, as leaders, who are given the responsibility...
You draw power from the people.
We draw power from the people.
And you say the people can easily be bought.
Absolutely. They can. They can because of the system that we are creating.
How can that be overcome then? We need solutions to this problem.
What we need to do, and I think it boils down to strengthening independent institutions. You know, there's an issue of judiciary accountability. If you feel like you've been aggrieved, you know, go to the GSC and complain. Don't go out to the streets and make pronouncements, you know, because a lot happens in this country. If you have a weak institutions, then you give room to corruption. You give room to lack of protection of citizens' rights. So there's a danger to that. So I think the kind of conversation that we should be having is this: how do we help Kenyans, you know, be able to cope with the serious challenges? You initiated this conversation by talking about the challenges in bursaries. That is a mature conversation that we must be having. And even in those funerals, in those rallies, what we should be talking about is these Kenyans are suffering. These poor Kenyans are suffering. What do we need to do? We need to move with lightning speed to ensure that they get what is rightfully theirs.
Thank you.
But when we start having sideshows, when we start saying this is a government of shareholders, when we start saying I will not respect the judiciary, you know, what are we teaching the younger generation?
Well, there are accountability platforms, and that's the beauty of
I mean, that's ridiculous,
the
really.
setup that we have. Let's sample the feedback, and I give you the final words here. Here is what you are saying on X. We'll sample just some, because there are many, and at the best interest of time. The hashtag is Daybreak, the SMS code 22422 at Citizen TV Kenya and at Ayub Abdikadir. Hassan Noor Guyo says the fight against the judiciary by the President, William Ruto, he means, and his deputy, is very personal and petty. It's high time that our institutions be protected and its independence appreciated. Kiblating says judiciary is the last lifeline in administration of justice. It is. Is it because of housing levy? Is it because of some judgments have not been favoring Kenya Kwanza administration? The rule of law is very clear that we should follow the same law. Daniel Sindiani, 78, says the feud between the executive and the judiciary proves that doctrine of separation of powers, which provides for checks and balances by the three arms of government, is being exercised. This is good for good governance. Babu Michel K says the only arm of government that has now remained independent is the executive. They want to monopolize that independence. They have legislature and now are trying it on the judiciary by all means. Sad state of affairs.
Closing remarks.
Well, just but a few. So final comments to you, Mr. President, Law Society of Kenya, Honorable Yusuf and Honorable Lekina.
Thank you. You know, there was a remark that my good friend here did make about the level of comedy that we see. And I think it probably meant in the sense of tragic comedy.
Yes. Because
the president of this country, when he speaks, his word has a different connotation to every other person. And what is important is that there is a message that the president sends. There are people who are looking at this country as a bastion of hope in the East African region and beyond, as a place of governance, as a place where there is democracy. And the fact that there are certain things that can be said in this country that cannot be said in some other countries, those are things that are envied across the region. And so we must continuously set a good pace, we must continuously set a good message, because we are an inspiration to so many within the region. So the more we grow our democracy, the more we grow our institutions, the more we inspire millions and millions across the East African region, across the African region, and across the world to look at Kenya as an example of where they would want to be in terms of the growth of their development. So I just want to say that I think it's healthy that we are having this conversation, and we have to keep having this conversation. We have to keep holding the government accountable. We have to support the government, but also to hold it account, to hold institutions within the Constitution accountable, and to keep on reminding them, lest they forget, because what is very clear is that power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So we need to remember that, and to keep holding these institutions to account, and to laud those that are actually undertaking their constitutional functions.
Thank you.
As dictated by the Constitution.
Asante. Yes, Honorable Yusuf.
Well, I would like to say that, in fact, what we have now in our country, and which seems to be misunderstood in some ways particularly by outsiders, is that we have a unique political culture, which has Kenyan characteristics. There is no country in the world where day one after the election, you start political rallies, you start roadside engagements, you have this culture of politicized funerals, and the permanent campaign, the permanent electoral campaign that goes on for 5 years. And this requires a lot of content. As you know, as a broadcaster, you need content.
Yeah.
And this content
very important
drives a lot of the pronouncement and the statements that come out of this particular gatherings. It looks like there is an editorial director who is directing the content of that political culture, in which people focus on a particular issue to engage, entertain, and keep the public busy. And this does not happen in many countries. And therefore, at times, I see this purely as the type of democracy that we have, which is Kenyan. People make statements, whether they're right or wrong. But at the end of the day, it really shows that our democracy is live, active, and robust. And as long as our constitution is not going to be tinkered with, and because that's a longer process, I don't see absolutely any problem in any of these people articulating their views and saying what they're saying. Even this member of parliament whom we've touched seems to be popularizing himself through the type of behavior that maybe many of us feel uncomfortable with. But people deserve the leaders they elect. And this is what we have.
Okay.
But I'm sure that our democracy is going to survive. We're going to fight for our constitution.
Thank you.
And there's absolutely no problem in having this public speech. It clearly shows that our democracy is active and alive.
Okay.
And uniquely Kenyan.
Thank you. Yes, Senator Olekina.
What we need to do is that we need to send our children to school. We need to release the bursaries in county levels, in the CDF. That is the number one thing that we need to do today. Because all these other sideshows will continue derailing the development of our education system. The biggest challenge we have, and this will be my closing remarks, is that the National Assembly must now call for a special sitting to ensure that money that is supposed to pay for bursaries for children has been sent. The assemblies in the counties, and this I call upon the Assembly of Narok, must ensure that they release, they negotiate. There is a court process, there is a court case which is holding the issue of bursaries. They must make sure that they go there and negotiate so that our children can be able to go to school. And finally, we're in a position where all of us must realize that nation building is a continuous process that requires maturity. I long for the time when meritocracy takes the day, and it is not personal favor based on your friendship. You know, because currently, this current administration is run by clueless individuals who are appointed as members of the cabinet based on their, friendship with the current occupant of the House of the Hill. You know, we are very incompetent cabinet secretaries. You know, the other day I had one cabinet secretary in a public rally, and he's a very good friend of mine, very competent, saying that the price of milk will now be 45 shillings. And then the president comes in and says, no, 50 shillings. So really, the left hand must know what the right hand is thinking. Because when a cabinet pronounces something, and then the boss comes in and says something else, we're playing politics with Kenyans. So I think we need to stop this issue of politics. We need to stop this issue of campaigning.
Thank you.
And now go back into nation building and encourage. And finally, let us release the monies to send our children to school.
As required, your time is all appreciated, gentlemen. Senator Ledama Olekina, Narok County, your time is appreciated. We'll see you again soon. The Law Society of Kenya President Eric Theuri, thank you. And to the Kamukunji lawmaker Yusuf Hassan Abdi, your time is all appreciated. And thank you to you too for waking up with us here. The hashtag on X has been Daybreak. The SMS code is 22422 at Citizen TV Kenya and at Ayub Abdikadir. Up next is Sporty Monday. Now the interesting bit is of AFCON and the Africa Cup of Nations. There are elephants, there are lions, there are pharaohs. Though some centuries old, in what's happening in Abidjan. They will be telling you more about the Africa Cup of Nations, which is happening in Cote d'Ivoire. Also, they will be talking about, I'm sure, the 2-2 draw at Old Trafford, which was the theatre of dreams, but now appears to be shattering dreams apart. And hugs for Zita Jimoy and Fred Arocho to that effect from Ten Hag and Manchester United. Then over the Craven Cottage in West London, just a stone throw away, Shitera must be elated by the outcome at Craven Cottage. The Blues must have ended for him. He's here in the studio with Fred Arocho on the team. In the company of Isaac Swil and Zita Jimoy, they are up next with Sporty Monday here on the broadcast. And we'll see you tomorrow morning here on Daybreak. Till then, good morning. Bye-bye.